You've met this person before. They talk the loudest in the room. They have an opinion on everything. They interrupt experts to correct them. They've never once said, "I don't know," because in their mind there is nothing they don't know. And the most unsettling part? They genuinely believe it. This isn't arrogance for show. This isn't a performance. Deep inside, this person is completely convinced they are the smartest one in the room. And that conviction, that unshakable, bulletproof confidence, is exactly what makes them so dangerous to themselves and everyone around them. If you've ever been frustrated by someone like this, or if somewhere in the back of your mind a quiet, uncomfortable question just appeared, this video is going to explain everything. Stay till the end, because what psychology has discovered about this pattern is stranger and more fascinating than you think. Let's start with a question. Why do the people who know the least seem to be the most confident? Think about it. The person who has studied medicine for 15 years is careful with their words. They say things like, "It depends," and "the research suggests," and "we're not entirely sure yet." But the person who watched 3 YouTube videos on the same topic, they'll tell you exactly what's wrong with you, exactly what you should do, and exactly why the doctors are wrong. How does that happen? How does less knowledge produce more confidence? The answer has a name, and it changed the way psychologists understand human behavior forever. In 1999, 2 researchers at Cornell University named David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger published a study that would become one of the most referenced findings in modern psychology. They asked people to rate their own performance on tests of logic, grammar, and humor. Then they compared those self-ratings to how people actually performed. The results were stunning. The people who performed the worst dramatically overestimated how well they did. They didn't just think they were average. They thought they were above average. Some thought they were among the best. Meanwhile, the people who performed the best actually slightly underestimated themselves. This became known as the Dunning-Kruger Effect, and it is one of the most human things that exists. Here's the core insight, and pay close attention because this is where it gets psychologically fascinating. Incompetence doesn't just cause poor performance. It causes an inability to recognize poor performance. In other words, the same lack of skill that makes someone bad at something also makes them unable to see that they're bad at it. Think about what that means for a second. If you don't know enough about a subject, you don't have the mental framework to evaluate your own understanding of it. You can't see the gaps in your knowledge because you don't know the gaps exist. You don't know what you don't know. And in the absence of that awareness, the brain does something very predictable. It fills the gap with confidence. This is not stupidity in the traditional sense. This is a cognitive blind spot that every single human being has in some area of their life, including you, including me. Pause here for a second and think honestly about something. Is there an area in your life where you speak with more confidence than your actual experience justifies? A topic where you form strong opinions based on surface-level information? If you can identify one, that's actually a sign of intelligence, because the ability to recognize your own blind spots is itself a skill, one that the people we're talking about today have never developed. Now let's talk about what this actually looks like in real life. Because the Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't just show up on psychology tests, it shows up everywhere. It's the new employee who's been on the job for 3 weeks and already has ideas for how to completely restructure the company. Not because they're ambitious, but because they haven't been there long enough to understand why things are the way they are. It's the person at Thanksgiving dinner who explains geopolitics, economics, and climate science with complete certainty based on things they read in headlines last Tuesday. It's the guy in the gym who's been training for 4 months and now corrects the form of people who've been training for 10 years. It's the entrepreneur who's never built anything dismissing the advice of someone who's built 3 successful companies because they watched a motivational video that morning. None of these people are evil. None of them are even consciously lying. They genuinely believe what they're saying. And that's what makes this so complicated. Here's where the psychology goes deeper. There are actually multiple layers to why people get stuck in this pattern. And not all of them are about intelligence. Some of them are about something much more painful. The first layer is genuine cognitive limitation. Some people simply haven't developed the metacognitive skills, the ability to think about their own thinking, that allow for accurate self-assessment. This can be shaped by education, environment, and neurological differences. But the second layer is psychological protection. For many people who display this pattern, the overconfidence isn't random, it's a defense mechanism. Somewhere underneath the loud certainty is a person who is deeply afraid of being seen as inadequate. And the loudness is armor. If they admit they don't know something, that feels like exposure. That feels dangerous. So they double down. They get louder. They dismiss the expert. They attack the question. Because being wrong in their world doesn't just mean being wrong, it means being worthless. And that's a wound. Not an intellectual failure, a wound. The third layer is social environment. People who are never challenged become people who never develop the skill of being wrong. If everyone around you agrees with everything you say, if no one ever respectfully pushes back, if the culture you grew up in rewarded confidence over accuracy, you will never learn that your internal sense of certainty is not reliable evidence of being right. Now here's the twist that makes this whole thing even more interesting. Studies show that as people gain genuine expertise in a subject, their confidence actually drops before it rises again. At the very beginning of learning something, confidence is high, because you don't know enough to know what's complicated. Then, as you learn more, you start to see how much you don't know, and confidence drops. This is sometimes called the valley of despair. And most people who give up on learning something give up here, right at the moment when real understanding was beginning. The ones who push through eventually reach a place where confidence and competence align, where they know a lot, they know the limits of what they know, and they hold both simultaneously. The people we're talking about today never entered the valley. They peaked on that first hill and decided the view was fine. Let's talk about how to deal with this in real life. Because most of us have someone like this in our lives. And let's be honest, arguing with them doesn't work. Presenting evidence doesn't work. Trying to embarrass them in front of others really doesn't work, because the mechanism that would allow them to receive that information is the same mechanism that's broken. What actually works, according to research, is something quieter and more patient. The most effective approach is asking questions instead of making statements. Not challenging questions designed to expose them. Genuine, curious questions that invite them to go deeper than their surface confidence can take them. That's interesting. How did you come to that conclusion? What would change your mind about that? What do you think someone who disagreed with you would say? These questions don't threaten the ego directly. They invite reflection. And sometimes that's enough to create a small crack in the certainty, just enough for real thinking to begin. But here is the uncomfortable truth that most people don't want to hear. You cannot force someone to develop self-awareness. You cannot argue someone out of a belief they didn't reason themselves into. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is stop explaining, stop defending, and let the results of their decisions teach them what your words never could. Life has a way of doing that, eventually. Now here is the part that matters most. This video isn't really about other people. It never was. Because the most dangerous version of this pattern isn't the loud guy at the dinner table. It's the quiet, subtle version that lives in all of us. The area where we stopped learning because we thought we already understood. The relationship we misread because we were too confident in our first impression. The decision we made without consulting anyone because we were sure we had it figured out. The antidote to the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't intelligence. It's curiosity. It's the willingness to stay in the question a little longer than feels comfortable. To say, I might be wrong about this, without it feeling like a collapse of identity. The smartest people in any room are almost always the ones asking the most questions. Not because they know less, but because they know enough to know how much more there is to know. And that gap between what we know and what we think we know is where real growth lives. The question is whether you're willing to stand in it.